We're here again. Welcome back to the Shrine of Amana. After a somewhat embarrassing defeat last time, it's time to change up our tactics a little bit. Not a lot, because what we were doing fundamentally works, I just did it poorly. This time I'm going to take a safer approach all around. The easiest way to counter-snipe these guys is to simply hide behind pillars, or walls, or anything that protrudes up from the ground and can absorb the bolt. You can also simply roll out of the way. However, especially if you're using a great bow, there's significant delay. So do be aware that if you try and engage in long-range combat, there's still a danger that you'll take some damage. It's just if you do it this way, you'll only be taking damage from the homing bolts and not, say, an aberration or an archstrike soldier. It is regrettably pretty hard to sneak up on anybody in knee-high water. After a brief experiment with the silver-black spear, I've decided that no, the Amana priestesses pretty much resist everything, except for physical damage, so the partisan will serve us much better. The Helix Halberd even more so, but it's kind of slow, and having a slow weapon in this area can be a bit of a liability. It's not the end of the world, but you do want to be able to quickly strike and then maneuver away from any incoming ranged attacks. Especially when dealing with the aberrations, the fact that both the Helix Halberd... Actually, no, I think the Helix Halberd did take those out in one shot. Oh, it doesn't matter. Just do what you're comfortable with and try to survive. Any kind of bow will work for this, but great bows in particular are pretty effective. They have pretty strong stun-locking properties. Excuse me?! Well, that's the Ogre's grab attack. It sucks. It has a magical hitbox that acts as a sort of vacuum. Well, it's a good thing that the aberrations drop so many human effigies. Had it up to here with this place. I've had it up to here with aberrations, I've had it up to here with ogres, I've had it up to here with priestesses. This whole place can go suck an egg. However, I'm not so sick of it that I'm just going to use a summon sign to get through it. I'll be happy to use those for bosses if they show up, but to get through areas I'm a little more leery of that. I feel like that might legitimately take away from the experience a bit, so I'm going to try and avoid doing that on camera. It was really tempting at this point, though, I tell you what. Now, I would like to think that I have learned from my mistakes here, So after quickly recovering my souls, I back the hell off from the ogre area. Once there's significant distance between me and him, I make a run for it. The ogres don't give nearly enough souls to really justify killing them each time you come through here. Barring some bad luck with hitboxes and grabs, running past them is fairly easy. The Slumbering Dragon Shield is an interesting addition to our arsenal because it has a unique effect. Stamina recovery. As you can see from the stats there, it's garbage as a shield except against like status effects, and even then there's better. However, if you simply hold this in your offhand or you have it on your back while you're, say, two-handing a spear, you'll get enhanced stamina recovery while it's equipped. There are several shields that do things like this in the game. This is technically the earliest one that's available, I believe. I would say that statistically speaking, it's probably the worst shield that does this, but when you have nothing else that has that special effect, then I would recommend using it nonetheless. Unless your playstyle depends really heavily on shield blocking, like you've been using great shields, then you should probably stick to what you know. Alright, so this approach thwarted us last time. I'm going to try something different this time and hope it works out a little better. Across short open distances like these, the best you can really do is just trade damage and use some life gems. It's not particularly skillful, but it is expedient. Now, unfortunately, equipping the Slumbering Dragon Shield actually put us a little bit over equip burden. Shouldn't be too much of a problem for now. These guys are really not slowed down one iota by the water. Fortunately, when you're not putting yourself in a terrible position next to a bottomless pit, they're not too difficult to deal with if you can see them coming, especially if you get a couple free hits in with your bow. Now, that priestess over there is special. She doesn't appear to be able to shoot homing bolts, but she is able to heal, and I believe she can buff up those Archdrake soldiers. If she gets the chance, anyway. Between Dragon Charms, Crimson Water, and Twinkling Titanite, this is a really good place to farm for valuable items and consumables, if you have the patience for this area. And I totally understand if you don't. Before we move on, there's a slightly secret area over here. If you break through these roots, you will reveal a hidden alcove here with an ogre in it. Now, ogres are quite weak to fire, so I thought I would just use my Black Knight Halberd. However, for whatever reason, either I just don't hit the sweet spot on this guy, or this one is uniquely not weak to fire, or this weapon is just a little weaker now that we've progressed more in the game. But regardless, it's not doing as much damage as I really like it to. That's their grab animation, by the way. It comes out really quickly. And they like to spam it, to be perfectly honest. Now, I would say that this ogre is easier to deal with than his brother out on the open lake because we're pretty sure that there are simply no bottomless pits around here, so we have quite a bit more room to maneuver. To that end, we can sort of bait him into doing that butt slam attack, which is far and away the attack that leaves him most vulnerable. To get him to do it, you really just have to circle around behind him as best you can. sometimes they do it themselves, and that's helpful. You would think that the attack where they finish up their punching combo where they fall to the ground would take the most time to recover from. However, it is not so. It is in fact the butt slam. Either way, if you can avoid the grab, ogres aren't terribly difficult, at least one at a time. Our reward for this detour is the Singer's Dress and a life ring plus 2. The life ring plus 2 is fairly self-explanatory. It gives life plus. The Singer's Dress is a unique chest piece that doesn't offer a whole lot of physical protection, but it looks fairly nice, and it does have decent resistances against magic damage and bleeding, if that's a concern. It's also very light, so if you're into fashion souls and you want a chest piece that isn't super heavy, you could definitely do a lot worse. This trinket out here is kind of a pain to get. The ground is steep, so it's not very difficult at all to just sort of slip and fall off, and so close to the fog door, that would be a shame. Through the door, we find this conga line of bugs. These bugs are slightly special in that instead of poison clouds, they release corrosive clouds. They're not really a big deal either way, but just to save your equipment and probably some souls in the long run, you should keep your distance until the orangey acid goes away. The bugs are guarding not the final bonfire in this area, but probably one of the more important ones. Roy's resting place serves as the bonfire that you will use as your home base for the boss run. Now, there's really no reason to go back and kill all of these guys. They're so slow that even if they notice you, you'll probably be gone before they even close the distance. But they do drop life gems, so if you're in that kind of mood, just want to kill some indigenous fauna, be my guest, I guess. One of these bugs is not like the other. The enormo huge one back there will not move and releases a much larger cloud of corrosive gas. It's possible to get in there and deal with him with melee weapons, but I would not recommend it. You will probably have most of your gear break. Instead, just use whatever ranged weapons you have available and take him out from a distance, because, like I said, he will not move. It is his job to block your path in the most obnoxious way possible. To make this a little easier, he doesn't actually have a lot of health for something so big. Like all bugs, he's also pretty weak to fire, so if you have, say, pyromancies or fire arrows, then he'll go down pretty quickly. You're pretty much immediately under fire here. If you maneuver correctly, sort of back down the tunnel where it slopes, you can simply get the bolts to bounce harmlessly off the cave mouth. Now, that said, even if you manage to take out that one priestess from the tunnel entrance, your trials and tribulations are not yet over. This area has a couple of surprises left before you can get to the boss. The meanest surprise is probably over here. This priestess will play dead until you enter her line of sight, and normally that will probably be when you cross the bridge to the left of here. when you're sniping like this, do your best to go for headshots. It might save you an arrow or two. And it's also more prone to making them stagger, pretty much just regardless of what enemy you're shooting at. This area is chock full of aberrations that are being lulled to sleep by the singing. It's not really necessary to fight any of them if you're careful, but they also just sort of present themselves as handy targets for human effigy drops, so... Now this is the second surprise. Dark Spirit Peculiar Kindler is problematic. Kindler likes to use a wide variety of high-level spells and hexes. He also likes to stick around in the water, and he rolls around a lot, meaning that it can be very difficult to actually close the distance on him, which is not good. However, spell parrying makes him very easy, because most of his attacks have a pretty big wind-up to them. It's safer than rolling, and once you actually get in there, his shield doesn't actually block much of anything. So you can... Provided that you can get in close, he's not a big deal. However, if he manages to keep you at a distance, then he'll probably win a sustained damage fight, because he'll use Dark Orb, Dark Storm, not Dark Storm, Dark Hail, Storm, Hail, whatever, Crystal Soul Spear, which is a spell we don't even have access to until New Game Plus, by the way, and I think a couple other things, maybe just Vanilla Soul Spear. Either way, I would not recommend trying to snipe him to death, because he will probably counterattack for much more damage than your arrows do. He's also obnoxiously accurate, which is why I recommend spell parrying instead of dodging, especially in the water. The timing on spell parrying is pretty generous, especially for those big projectile spells. Fortunately, he will only spawn once, so once you deal with him in whatever way you choose, then the way is mostly clear. Mostly. There are a couple of unique goodies here, like the Red Iron Twin Blade. It is a twin blade that has a slightly different attack pattern and scales off of strength more than it does dexterity. Whereas the twin blade we have scales more or less equally off of both. It also has a much lower dexterity requirement, so it's actually probably the easier blade to wield, all told. Even though it has a much higher strength requirement, you can simply two-hand it, and you'll be okay. Homing Crystal Soul Mass is a more powerful version of the Homing Soul Mass spell. Crystals make things very strong, you see. However, like most sorceries at this point, they're a little beyond our pay grade. I'm pretty sure we've cleared out the enemies here, so I don't think I'll be rolling. To that effect, I'm going to light a torch real quick and show that it's a bit easier to tell where the safe zones are and where they are not with the contrast provided from a torch. Cast light is still much better than nothing, and it has its own benefits, like being able to two-hand things and not going out when you roll. But there's trade-offs. I also sometimes I like wielding a torch. It's sort of atmospheric. We're nearing the very end of Shrine of Amana here, so I'm going to make one more check around this hut for goodies, and then we're almost done. Thank goodness. Oh dear. This Milfinito looks a little worse for the wear. Are you okay? Hello? That's a solid no, not okay. But that raises a bit of a question. If she was not the one singing, because the singing is persisting even after her mysterious disappearance, then who is producing those lovely notes? The answer lies beyond a boss fight, so I'm switching up my inventory a little bit, equipping the right rings, etc., etc. I won't be needing a bow for this fight, so I want to be as unburdened as possible. This is the Demon of Song, who is evidently responsible for the song we were hearing in that third part of the shrine. Once we engage it in battle, the singing will stop. Now, the Demon of Song is not a particularly complex boss. However, he does have a really obnoxious gimmick. When his only vulnerable point is the skull face with the arms. If you hit any other part of him on that sort of rubbery layer, then your weapon will just sort of bounce off. To compensate for this, you're going to need to learn basically what range and angle your weapon attacks the best from. This is not a concern with most enemies and bosses. So, if you're a pure melee character, this can be a bit of a challenge, just getting used to this new dynamic of the fight. Aside from his various lunges and jumps, and just sort of flailing around with his arms, aside from that grab attack, he doesn't really have any tricks up his sleeve. Aside from, just being really obnoxious to hit with some weapons. This is his most damaging attack, and we got clipped by it because I think we rolled right into the wall. However, it's got a pretty long recovery time, so if you do get clipped by it and you survive, you should have more than enough time to heal. Most of his attacks actually sort of fit in that category of slow but strong. So just pay attention to his arms. Pay attention when he rears up, because that means he's going to do his big old body slam. And stop attacking when he pulls his little hood down. If you get too far away, he also has a projectile bubble attack that doesn't really hurt that bad, but it's something to be aware of. All in all, not a very difficult boss once you realize that the rubbery part is invulnerable. For our victory, we get his soul and the key to the embedded, which is evidently what we need to open that door where what we now know to be a Milfanito is being imprisoned in Dranglake Castle. Oddly enough, the key to the embedded is actually a weapon. It is in fact a keyblade. It cannot be upgraded or enhanced in any way. However, it starts with a fairly respectable 190 attack rating, good dexterity scaling, a strong attack pattern, and very high counter damage. The embedded seems kind of fucked up, to be honest. But if it is his wish, then we shall indeed shove this key into his bosom for his rhapsodic fate. Weird. With the Demon of Song out of the way, the path is now clear. Now, this bonfire that the message just mentioned can actually be really difficult to find if you're just sort of on a beeline for your next destination. And I know the first time I made it through this area, I was not really intent on exploring more murkily lit water. But if you do explore a little, you'll get this final bonfire and a fairly sizable area left to explore. Up this tower, we find a locked door. I had heard that keyblades can open anything, but this one must be a dud. We'll have to find the secret of that door some other time. But for now, I think we should give ourselves a rest, pat ourselves on the back for making it through this awful place, and finally find the goddamn king!